Greetings, everybody. It's Dr. Schiller, and I am here for another session with my friend and colleague, Josh Goldberg, who is a CBT practitioner. Thanks, Josh, for joining me. Last time when we met, we had this rich discussion talking about the internet connection among early life distress and trauma, emotional mental distress, relationship breakdown, and physical illness. So really talking about the various kinds of life events and the biological pathways by which the mind and body are connected, by which the software and the hardware, so to speak, interact, and all sorts of difficult things that can come out in terms of a person's mental, emotional relationship and physical life. So a lot of people had great comments and questions about that. And one of them was like, okay, what do we do about it? Right? So we know all these difficult things that can go on. We know that stress and trauma can set in motion a whole set of biological and physiologic changes that feed into this loop between physical disease, physical symptoms, and mental emotional symptoms. But what do we do to heal? How can we actually get better? So that's where we're at today. And Josh, you have all the answers for us, right?
I don't, but I'd like to thank you for the opportunity for coming on and chatting with you about this. I'm really excited to have this discussion.
Great. Welcome aboard. Thanks for being here. Well, why don't we start from the psychotherapeutic or CBT point of view? You know, tell the audience, like, what is CBT? What's it based on? What do you do in a session? And what kind of impact do you have on people?
Yeah, so CBT is mainly focused on thought patterns, and the thoughts really control, I'm sure you would agree, doctor, the thoughts really control the whole body, including the emotions. If emotions don't have some type of thought process to manage them and to process them and to regulate them, you've got yourself an unhappy or an unstable person right there. So, CBT is mainly focused on thought patterns. But the truth is, in order to overcome childhood trauma or past traumas or childhood emotional neglect and other forms of difficulty, CBT is just one thing that we work with. We also work with a little bit of NLP, which is a little linguistic programming, and a lot of emotional intelligence and emotional boundaries, and also a little bit of DBT, which is more behavioral stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And also inner child work, along with that, communication skills. So it's kind of like CBT is really helpful, but I think a number of different modalities can be used at different times in order to help a person to resolve things that they've been through emotionally and to come to a better state of mental health, which, as I'm sure you would go into and agree with, it also affects their physical health.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I agree 100%. And so it sounds to me like, the main thrust of what you're doing in CBT is helping people to develop more productive thought patterns that help them cope with whatever emotional circumstances or life circumstances they might be in, so that they manage it. It's sort of like you're giving them the wheel of the ship. So instead of just spinning around and being confused, they can actually have some free choice and start to actually more consciously choose how to respond to life. Would that be a fair way of describing it?
Exactly.
Could you give some examples of that? Maybe, if any cases come to mind, or just a hypothetical scenario, just kind of flesh it out for the audience.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I got so many examples that I want to kind of mention. But I mean, as everyone knows, especially when a child, it's also with adults, but especially a child that's in a situation that is, distressing or neglectful or traumatic or abusive. Okay, the child has to work out a way to cope with this environment, and the way that the child gets through it, it gets the child through it. But those thinking patterns and those processes that they create to get through it obviously become detrimental in the person's teenage years, and also their adult life is significantly impaired by that. So, for example, one of the most common things that I talk about is something called omnipotent control, which is where a child will perceive and imagine that they can scan the environment and know exactly what's going on. They know exactly when dad's in a bad mood and when he's going to become violent. They know what mum's doing, and they develop like this omnipotence of perceiving that they have control over the environment, which
Uh-huh.
obviously is not possible, but they do it to, I guess, give themselves a feeling of safety so that they can continue to exist in this environment that is not emotionally or physically safe.
Uh-huh. Sure.
And this is a way of thinking that I have control, and I can assume, I can read other people's facial expressions and body language, and I know what's going to happen next. Okay, which is obviously magical thinking.
Uh-huh.
So there's two examples right there. So omnipotent control, magical thinking,
Right.
assuming emotions, and this is all for the child to survive and to feel more safe and comfortable in
Right.
an environment
Right.
that's stressful. And in adult life, obviously, you try to have a relationship with someone that's assuming what you're going to do next, trying to control you, which is not pleasant in a relationship, and then it becomes detrimental to the person's life.
I hear that. So
Yeah.
what I'm hearing you say is that one of the ways that a child who grows up in a dangerous or traumatic environment, they'll develop this tendency to be constantly scanning and over interpreting what's going on in their environment, and they carry that through to adulthood, and it's not accurate necessarily. It's not necessarily connected to the reality. It's more imaginative, and they'll bring that into an adult relationship, and the other adult is like, well, what are you talking about, man? That's not going on here. Is that what we're talking about here?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's just that is a common example, but there are literally, like, there's a massive list of different ways of survival and coping that a child and even adults can even
Right.
start
Right.
up with this if they find themselves in a situation that is stressful and especially ongoing. Like if they find themselves in a work environment that might be a little bit toxic or stressful,
Yeah.
the person can start to dissociate. So dissociation is another classic one that
Hmm.
people know about.
Yeah.
Dissociation, which is when a person just divorces themselves from their feelings and what they're dealing with. They just literally just check out.
Right.
And again, in a relationship, it's hard to connect with someone that's checking out and dissociating.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
And so how do you help with that? How would you, what kind of therapeutic interaction would you do that might help that person? First of all, you described the first example of someone who's got this sort of sense of knowing exactly what's going to happen, this omnipotence type of thing, who's over interpreting and misinterpreting the social cues in their environment as one kind of not so productive behavior. And the other one you talked about was where someone will dissociate and disconnect emotionally from behavior. Could you speak to those two circumstances and how your approach might help them?
Yeah, sure. So that's a really good question. And I think that I do things a little bit differently. And there's a lot of common sense to this approach. But I don't think I invented it. I just kind of structure it this way. And that is before getting to the person's timeline, because obviously self-discovery, meaning connecting the dots between why am I doing this now and connecting that to where that first started is
Yeah.
hugely beneficial. But to be honest, I personally think that people that are just starting out, because the environment that had this stress where they had to cope in this way was also the environment that wasn't really teaching them how to, like, what emotional boundaries are, or
Right.
how to process their feelings, or
Right.
how
Right.
to how to think about what they're going to feel. So I've found in the past, just by trial and error, that trying to get to someone's timeline pretty quick, like just saying, okay, let's start to go back a little bit to your childhood, the person will often become quite nervous about that and fearful, which is understandable because, like, if I asked you to go into a room with radioactive material
Right.
without any training or any protective gear, you're probably going to say, "Well, Josh, like,
Right.
I don't know if I want to do that."
Right.
But if you give the person the right suit, the radioactive suit, and the just like a few days training and just the confidence and the comfort to go and deal with that radioactive material,
Yeah.
they'll go in there and be able to to deal with it and to move it out. But
Right.
so I
Right.
spend the first month or two, depending on the person's I guess position, and really giving them the emotional education that their childhood environment failed to give them. So emotional boundaries, emotional intelligence,
Right.
and this already gives a person some confidence to start feeling comfortable with their feelings again. So when they
Right. Right.
get into their timeline, they're no longer that afraid of what they're going to find there. They're not going to be afraid of these emotions. And
I see.
People
Right.
can often people can even quit the therapeutic process just out of sheer fear that I can't dig
Right.
up this box because I'm just too afraid of what's down there.
Right. Right. So what I hear you saying is that the key, um, the therapeutic invention and actually intervention that actually brings them out of the difficulties comes from developing emotional intelligence so that they can actually um, experience the fullness of their life and their emotions and potentially their memories, and they can't really even go back into, okay, how did you learn this unproductive thought pattern, until they have the emotional stability to relate to the fullness of that experience, which is in part mental, but it's in part very much emotional. And so you have to
Yes,
give them the emotional stability and confidence to meet themselves on a certain level.
exactly. Yes, it's
Yeah.
giving the person the comfort and the confidence to deal with whatever feelings that
Yeah.
they might
Yeah.
find when they go back into
Right.
their unpleasant past, whether it
Yeah.
be distant past like childhood or even a recent relationship.
Right.
Because
Right.
human beings are pain avoidant by nature, so you have to give them some significant tools to feel
Yeah.
comfortable and confident
Yeah.
to approach that.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate you explaining that.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you do that? How do you give them emotional intelligence? How do you enhance their sense of comfort relating to their own emotional experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I'm gonna paraphrase the term that you used at the start of our session and also in the last podcast. So like the operating system. So
Uh,
someone that grows up in an environment that is emotionally neglectful or abusive or traumatic, I mean, they often don't have the program to deal with their own feelings. So
yeah.
they will often be quite divorced from their feelings. And this is obviously, it's got a term, I think it's called alexithymia, where a
Right.
person just doesn't have really any real contact with their feelings. Like they're not
Right.
able to label their feelings.
Right.
They don't know where their feelings stop and where someone else's feelings start.
Right.
These individuals also tend to absorb a lot of other people's emotions, so they're very open to blame and guilt and being controlled and manipulated, which
Hmm.
obviously makes life incredibly difficult because
Sure.
exploitative people can take advantage of that.
Right.
So it's really just um, it's just educating and teaching, and the client will come with pen and paper and they will literally just learn the the key points for their emotional boundaries and their operating system for how to deal with their feelings and the feelings of other people. And
Right.
it's really inspiring, to have people coming in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 50s that are like sitting with a pen and paper and learning how to deal with their feelings. It's actually like makes me quite emotional to talk about because I mean, it makes you realize that this person didn't get taught how to handle
Right.
the
Right.
feelings of other people and even their own feelings.
Right.
And in my opinion, it's quite heroic to really decide to come
Yeah.
on and just learn it. So it's really just learning. It's not difficult learning, but it's just the right learning for feelings. And people are very hungry for that, just to how
Right.
to deal
Right.
with it because life's
Right.
tough when you can't deal with your feelings and the emotions of other people. It's very
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me because you're describing the word you used, if I heard correctly, was alexithymia,
Mm,
which is a technical clinical term meaning a person doesn't have any emotional awareness, or they don't even really, they have experiences, but they can't name it, they can't label it, they can't relate to it. And so I'm hearing that people are having a hunger for learning to cope with life and live, but not necessarily the skills to do it. And what I didn't understand is you said you sit to them with a pen and paper and they learn to cope with their emotions. How? What exactly do you do? Could you flesh that out?
Oh, so I'm just giving them some key points in regards to the reality of emotions. So,
Right.
like
Right.
what, like just factual information that the person learns with their rational mind
Right.
that operate, which is the operating system which manages their own emotions
Right.
and the emotions of others. So when
Right.
people present to me, they usually have a program that is, I guess, based on coping and so on. So normally their program will tell them when I have a feeling, when I have an emotion, I have to ignore it. That's what the program is saying. When this
Yeah.
happens, this
Yeah.
happens.
Right.
Or when someone else has a feeling, especially an unpleasant feeling, I have to do something to make that better. And this is obviously people pleasing.
Right.
And now that program has, been developed somewhere. So now it's just a case of kind of giving them the new operating system. And
Right.
so to undo those 2 points,
Right.
so the emotional intelligence that they would learn because we have a set program. So they would learn, when I have emotions, these emotions are very important. And they're actually coming to give me a significant message about the environment that I'm facing right now. So
Right.
that's quite different to what their previous program was telling them.
Right. Right.
And then as far as the feelings of others, so instead of someone else is having an unpleasant feeling, I have to do something for them in order to make them feel better, which is people pleasing. The emotional intelligence that they would learn would be something to the tune of, okay, other people's feelings is something that they're experiencing. I'm not responsible for it, but I can choose to be understanding and validating if I want to
Right.
connect to that person.
Right. Right. Okay.
So
I think I understand it. So in other
yeah,
words, you'll just give them fairly simple rules or ideas, like it's okay to feel your emotions, and it's actually important to feel your emotions. Your emotions have important information for you to learn. Your emotions are not dangerous, and they'll sit and they'll write these sort of things out. They'll be like acknowledging what you're saying and writing it. Is that how it
exactly.
goes?
Exactly. I've put together 10 key facts of emotional intelligence, and those 10, if a person takes them on and they really kind of solidify them in their mind and they use
Yeah.
that to operate their feelings and to deal with
I,
the emotions of others, they'll be good with that. They will be good. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. So like
Yeah,
somebody's learning to drive and you tell them, here's a switch to turn on the lights, and here's a switch for the blinker, and here's the gear shift, and here's the gas, and here's the brake. And similarly, you're giving them intellectual principles that they need to walk with. They need to learn how to do it. But by
exactly.
giving it to them, you're giving them a sense of familiarity and understanding of the emotional terrain. And then you're saying, okay, go walk with it. And let's talk next week how you do.
Perfect, exactly. And that's actually something that I think is super valuable, is giving the person something in between for the week or two that they're kind of autonomous with it, to
Yeah.
give them an exercise to carry this out, right? Because the brain loves repetition. So,
Right.
if we just do that in a 1 hour session, then that's kind of the next week they're, I guess, just forgetting about it. So
Yeah, sure.
there's always an exercise, CBT and especially DBT and even NLP. There's always an exercise to do. And the first exercise that they will get is to do an emotion journal, which is to use a color wheel, which has all the emotional words on there, to try and
Uh-huh.
increase their emotional vocabulary.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Because most people that present, they really only know and use maybe 4 or 5 emotion words, like
Uh-huh.
sad, angry, happy, maybe, and I guess frustrated. I mean,
Right.
that gets them through life, right? Which is
Right.
really, there's so many words to describe your emotional experience. So
Right.
for the
Right.
first exercise, I'll just get them to, buy themselves a diary, and each night before bed, just to kind of think back on their day and ask themselves, okay, what significant emotions did I feel today?
Mhm.
And to use the wheel to really select the most accurate word that describes what feeling that they were having. And this
Right.
helps them to reconnect to their emotions and to expand their emotional vocabulary, which is a great start.
Right. Right. Interesting. Now, how many words are on that wheel?
Oh, there's probably, it's a good question, eh? Maybe 30 or 40.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but
Interesting.
there's a lot more. There's lists that have hundreds of words.
Uh-huh.
Um, and this color wheel is good because it kind of separates it into colors, and it's visual and it's easier for people. Because you got to remember, these are people that, they haven't really been connecting to their emotions for sometimes for
Right.
decades. So you
Right.
give them 100 words to choose from, it can just become quite
It's
overwhelming.
a lot.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
lot.
And
So
so, yeah, and so it sounds to me like you're speaking about people who really have had significant trauma. We're not talking about people who have a more who may be going through emotional challenges or difficulty, but have mostly been sort of operating relatively skillfully in relation to themselves and others. We're talking about clients who have really had traumatic experiences that have really impaired their ability to have an emotionally intelligent life.
yes, that is a significant, I guess, group of the people. At
Yeah.
the same time, people that have high emotional intelligence, and they are connected to their feelings, and they have emotional boundaries, and they have empathy. These types of personalities also find their way to me, because these types of personalities, especially the rescuing personality, which is
Mhm.
someone that's high empathy, and they are emotionally intelligent, but
Mhm.
they have I guess their empathy drives them to be very compassionate and caring towards people. And sometimes this person can also find themselves into a abusive relationship, because someone that is stuck in like a victim mindset wants someone to to react to them and to care for them. So
Yeah.
sometimes people come to me that have a really high emotional intelligence, and then we just kind of fast track that portion. We don't have to go through the emotional intelligence aspect of it, because the person already has it. They don't have to go through
Right.
it again.
So in that case, you would teach them more about the interpersonal aspects of this. And I think you mentioned something before about, it's okay if somebody else has a difficult emotion. I don't need to fix it. I don't need to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So it is very much a program that someone can actually graduate when
Right.
they go through it. So if they don't need the emotional intelligence aspect of it, then that
Right.
part is just kind of, that module is ticked, and they move on to the next one, which is thinking patterns, and
Right.
moving on towards other things that and especially the self-discovery part is going
Right.
to be on that list next, because if someone's rescuing someone, they have this rescuing mentality for a reason, even if they have emotional intelligence.
Right.
And this
Right.
can be resolved also, which
Right.
I'm sure you would have experienced also in your experience, clients that have this tendency to be like the caretaker or the rescuer or the helper,
Right.
and sometimes at their own expense.
Right. For sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
So
Yeah. I mean, I very much relate to the constellation of factors that you're describing of
yeah.
either a sort of in relationship with oneself or relationship with other. There can be a variety of different kinds of confusion about how to interact and function with emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Um,
Exactly.
what's interesting is just as a contrasting perspective, because I think my own practice has led me to interact with these sorts of clinical situations from less of a cognitive point of view, which is the thing that you're describing, which is really fascinating. I mean, just teaching the tools and the emotion wheels and having people do writing exercise to sort of verbalize and internalize the rules of emotional conduct on a certain level. Um, and the I guess the approach that I've taken in working with people has come from people who, working with people who have physical trauma, physical illness, also associated with emotional illness, depression, anxiety, and these things, but really a more of a contemplative, developing contemplative presence kind of approach. And so, there's a number of levels or layers of what I would call the inner steps of inner healing. And the first one is mindset. And that's where you're describing, like, okay, here are the rules of engagement. And we could probably talk for hours about the
Yeah.
different mindset approaches. And one of them is like, okay, it's safe to feel things. And it's okay to have other people feel things. And let me learn how to walk with that in life. And there's a whole other set of mindset things that are related to recovery from pain and illness. Like, many people have what I'm sure you've encountered. It was catastrophizing, where every bit of negativity that they experience, or certain kinds of negativity, are experienced not just as that negativity, but in a whole story that paints it as a catastrophe. And so my back hurts, and oh my gosh, it means I'm not going to be able to ever go to work again, and I'm going to be poor, and my wife's not going to respect me, and I'm not going to be able to do anything. I'm going to be a worthless person. Oh my gosh. And it's a catastrophic outlook on something that, well, no, you're having physical pain and perhaps emotional anxiety in relation to that physical pain. And so, the one of the next levels is kind of like what you could call regulation of the physiology, and just learning techniques that quiet those emotional arousal patterns. And it's not to tell the person, oh, your emotions are bad, but to generate a calm, to generate a physiology that is quiet, so that when the emotion comes, the person's frequently more able to just sort of see it and notice it for what it is. And that leads to kind of the development of what you could call mindfulness, which is, oh, okay, I'm having an emotion and this is what it feels like. I feel fear and I feel it in my chest. Okay, that's fear. And recognizing and labeling the felt experience of the emotion, which is very different than, and to me seems very complementary to sort of recognizing the more intellectual patterning or habits we have around the emotion. And I think the thing when you were talking about the interpersonal thing, when I sit with people, a lot of whom have chronic pain, a lot of whom have lived through trauma, a lot of whom may still be in traumatic or abusive relationships because they sort of go together. And when they start to develop mindfulness, meaning that capacity to just sit and be present and notice, here comes thought, here comes emotion, and just inquiring about it without getting lost in it, they start to just spontaneously see, like, wow, this guy is not good for me, right? They start to learn to be compassionate with themselves.
Yeah.
And like, okay, it's okay to not be in control. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to have fear, to feel vulnerable. I can learn to sit with that. And they have a certain compassionate and care for themselves. And from that, there's just this awareness that comes up, like, wow, my significant other is really not nice to me. And it's almost like out of a sense of self-respect and self-care comes this sense of like, that's not okay. And I'm curious what your sense of that is, what your experience and how you work from your model when, in the context of teaching somebody emotional intelligence, if sometimes they come back and they start to notice, wow, my significant other or my boss or whoever, I think they're emotionally abusive.
Yeah.
Does that happen? And how do you help them work with that?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point that you're making, especially about the emotional response of the body, which, with dissociation and other coping strategies, they usually have even, I guess, numbed that out a lot. And people actually try to numb this with substances and other things, which we don't have to go into right now. But so, yeah, as you said, super important, even with the way that your approach is it's vital what you're doing in terms of getting the person to recognize where they're feeling the emotion. If they're feeling panic or fear, that tightness in the chest, or if they're feeling the anxiety or that, disgust or shame, they feel it in their gut, and then they'll feel
Yeah.
nauseous.
Yeah.
And a lot of people also report in the inner child work, they report having like a lump in their throat, or like their throat is closing up. And this is a lot of the energy from childhood, where the child just wasn't able to really say anything back to their environment, and all that energy just got stuck here. They can feel it in the chest. Sorry, in the head. I said chest. In the head, anger and rage, usually you just get like a red face and your head just feels like it's going to explode. So welcoming these feelings and just letting the body have this emotional energy, move around is super important. But in terms of when
how do you encourage that? How do you help them welcome it? How do you help them hold it? What's your approach to that? Is it similar to what you described before in terms of, hey, here are the parameters and the rules, or are there other tools?
I think so. Because when a person gets that operating system and they feel comfortable with their feelings now, they no longer think that their feelings are a waste of time, or that they're weak. That's another common program, actually, is that my emotions make me weak, right? I can't be emotional. I have to be tough. Yeah. And that's one. Emotions make me weak, or emotions, they're not safe. They can hurt me. Or like if I feel my emotions or even experience them and especially express them, I could get punished. And that's the child that grows up where they say to their mum, mum, I'm feeling frustrated about this. And then it's, go to your room.
Right.
So emotion, they've been conditioned that emotions means punishment, or I'm going to get hurt.
Right.
So once they learn the right program, now they let their feelings just I guess they can experience their feelings a lot more comfortably and safely.
Mhm.
And that's when they'll start to notice a lot more about where they're actually feeling it, because now they're actually letting it happen.
Mhm.
And it's you can see people that have this old program. You can actually see themselves fighting their own tears. You like, they're holding it back, they're holding it down because their program is telling them, you
Right.
can't feel this. This is either dangerous or not allowed.
Yeah.
And when a person finds themselves, just going back to your original question, when a person finds themselves discovering that, wow, this relationship is actually dysfunctional and there might be emotional abuse going on, which is invisible. It's very hard to see it because the person's not displaying any physical violence, but there might be what I call verbal violence or emotional violence.
Right.
So at that point, it's okay. So now once the person has the emotional intelligence, let's work towards the inner child's attachment program, and
Mhm.
the person can discover what's keeping them there.
Right. So now what did you call that? The inner child attachment program?
Yeah, that's the inner child's experience in attaching to mom and dad.
Right.
So if there's a lot of guilt there, or if there's a lot of shame or anxiety, then those emotions that the inner child experienced that they weren't able to resolve could be keeping them with this person now that they know is not good for them, but their inner
Uh,
child is not really ready to walk away yet.
Right now, can you spell that out? So, for instance, the person who had a negative toxic relationship with a parent, and now
Hmm.
they're in a toxic relationship with a partner or a coworker or a sibling. Um, so, what exactly is going on in their mind? What is the program stating exactly?
That's a good question. And
And
this
then
is like,
and then what message are you giving to counteract that? Because if I'm understanding correctly, the approach you're using is based on first identifying that counterproductive, sort of inaccurate, false program, and then replacing it with a program or an understanding that is more adaptive and more positive.
yes, exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
So
So
spell it out if you can for someone who has been encountered or is in a toxic relationship. What might that look like?
yeah, so anyone that's in a toxic relationship and they're still communicating with the person,
Yeah.
there's always going to be a dissonance there. That's why they're still in touch with them. There's the dissonance. So the dissonance is, okay, the adult self knows that this person has significant issues. They don't treat me nicely. They disrespect me. They, they blame. I know they're not good for me. All
Right.
my friends and family are telling me that, look, you
Right.
got to get rid of this guy, or like you
Right.
got to get rid of this person.
Right.
So that's the adult thinking, that's the rational thinking, and it makes sense, and the person can know this. But then there's the inner child's feelings, the inner child's attachment that's telling them that this might be familiar. This is something that I have to fix. I have to fix this person.
Mhm.
I can't leave because otherwise I'll be lonely forever, and I don't want to feel lonely forever. I don't want to feel that abandonment. I don't want to feel that shame of being the one to end this connection. Or it
Right.
could even be the inner child's hoping that this could be something magical, but
Right.
the adult self is saying, wait a minute, but this is horrible. Like, I'm not getting any of my basic needs met in this relationship. The person is
Right.
blaming me.
Right.
They don't take responsibility for anything.
Right.
But then I can't leave because the inner child feels guilt for leaving. How can I
Right.
leave this
Right.
person? They're wounded.
Yeah.
What are they
Okay.
going to do without me, type of thing? So that's
Yeah.
the dissonance that the
Sure.
person is going to work towards resolving. And that's what I more or less support a person to do.
If I hear correctly, you're describing a whole set of different either belief systems that that person could be holding from their childhood, like if I don't behave properly, I'm going to be abandoned, or I'm going to be hurt, or I'm going to be feel shame, or who knows what. There's a whole set of different things that could be in the program, so to speak, from that child, from that program from childhood. So the adult mind is saying, wow, this person's not good for me, but the child is saying, but I can't get away because if I leave, then something really bad's going to happen. And
Yes.
now, do you kind of work individually with the person to help sort out, well, what is that program? Do you help them inquire and find out what that belief is? Or
Yes. 100%. 100%. So once the person has the emotional intelligence and the emotional boundaries, and they're able to, they're open to different ways of thinking, like they're open to reframing things that they went through, like looking at it from a different perspective, then this person can confidently, I'm not going to say comfortably, because it's never really that comfortable to confront pain, but then they can go back to the origins of their attachment style and what their inner child feels and thinks about themselves, their self-image, and how they see attachment, and even what they saw their parents doing. A lot of children experience trauma just from watching their parents fight between themselves, even though nothing negative was ever done towards the child. But each parent is 50% of the child's internal identity. So if mom and dad are fighting, then, well, I'm obviously not secure, because look at my parents. So then they go back to this experience and really identify what the origins are of these thought patterns and feelings. And then the person is able to undertake the exercises in order to resolve these experiences that the child wasn't able to really process at the time.
Sure. So if I hear correctly, like once you've helped them develop some emotional intelligence and comfort and be able to bear the discomfort, you'll take them back in what you call the timeline of helping them kind of like visit, okay, what were those events that were going on, and what are the feelings and beliefs that came out of those events?
Yes, exactly. And those discoveries are already a significant portion of the healing work. And then it's just, I guess, doing that inner child reparenting work, which allows the child to let go of that experience and the coping strategies that they took on, which a child doesn't let go. The inner child doesn't let go of those just because you grow up. You continue to hold on to that, and it can lead a person into that cognitive dissonance where it's, they find that they know their patterns, but they just continually go around in circles. And this is very common when you have people that will find a repetition in partners and friends. Like they'll always attract a similar type of person, and it doesn't seem that it's even statistically possible, but this is the world we live in, where you tend to attract the things that I guess replays or I guess validates that childhood experience.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I would say I've witnessed that dozens or maybe 100 times.
Yeah.
It's kind of an astonishing sort of, yes, I've had 9 different car accidents. Like, how does that happen? And, not to cast blame or aspersion or shame on anybody at all, but there's this very kind of astonishing phenomenon where it seems like sometimes a person will internalize some sort of pattern of belief that just leads extraordinary numbers of just recurrent traumatic experiences that are building trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma,
Exactly. And this is
and how do you, I think about that, and I think about it, okay, I can sort of surmise or imagine various psychological or physiologic explanations for it, but sometimes it seems like, this is some sort of soul thing or spiritual thing that's beyond their physical reality. How do you think about those situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that the person I guess usually takes on in the early stages of doing this type of work, especially with us, because we tend to be quite spiritual people. Like we think of things as spiritual. And if a person is able to look at these experiences as I guess I don't want to say a wake-up call, because that kind of, it's a bit harsh, but I'll say like a like an encouragement, or like an alarm maybe, or a spotlight, if you want to call it a spotlight, something that I guess encourages the person to really introspect and to resolve things that their soul needs to resolve in their journey in this world here. So and that's part of the reframing, where a person's able to start to look back on things and start to say, okay, so I went through these horrible experiences, but maybe I'm not a victim anymore. Maybe I can look at these in a different way, and it's gonna be more beneficial to me to see it in this way. And looking at it from a spiritual standpoint is good for anyone, no matter what their religion is, or no matter what their approaches in life, to see things from a spiritual perspective is always better than just kind of
Right.
focusing on, well, this happened to me and poor
Can
me
you
type of thing,
well, say
Yeah.
more about that? Like, I think I understand what you mean, but suppose someone's out there is saying, well, what does he mean? Thinking about it from a spiritual point of view, that can be a better way to relate to it. Can you spell that out a little bit?
Yeah, it's about reframing. It's about being able to see I guess the strengthening and uh, the the liberation and the benefits that the person is able to take away from something that they went through that was unpleasant or stressful. And it's not about making things positive. I want to stress that, because a lot of things that people go through in life will never be positive. And I'm very sensitive towards, toxic positivity. Like, say, for
Right,
example, someone
right,
survives a car crash. You
right,
don't want to say to them, oh, wow, yeah, but you survived. That's
right.
you got
Yeah,
to think positive.
right.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
great
not.
word. I just want to say that out loud, toxic positivity,
Yeah.
because it's such a, unfortunately, all too well-known phenomenon where
Yes.
someone's suffering and someone comes along with toxic positivity and imposes on them this idea that they should be thinking positively. There's something wrong with them for not. And it's
Yeah.
like, please go away.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. You're talking
Yeah.
about not being toxic positive, but reframing in a spiritual context. Please continue. That's very,
Exactly. So the spiritual reframing is just, I guess, coming to a perception of, okay, so I went through this unpleasant experience.
yeah.
How can I be strengthened through this? Like, how can I, and what can I identify with this? Like, how can I take strength and more of myself out of this that I didn't have before?
Right.
So
Right.
that's the spiritual side of it. It's not about making it positive. It's about getting a deeper sense of self and a strengthening, and I call it liberation. So that, like,
Yeah.
obviously liberating themselves from the experience.
Right.
And that is, a very positive thing. It's a very beneficial thing for the person to be able to perceive things in that way, and also for the inner child to be able to let go of what they've been holding on to. Sometimes
Right.
that holding on to that experience is safe in it because it's comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
What
So
do you
the
mean by
spiritual aspect.
what do you mean by liberating them from the experience? Could you open that up a little bit?
Yeah. So when someone experiences something, they obviously experience it mainly through their emotional experience. Like, what did I feel when I had this experience? And then
Right.
the thoughts are all kind of constructed around that. And
Right.
when you experience something, you experience it really from head on. Like a driver of, like, when you have a car accident, God forbid someone has a car accident, but they experience it from the driver's seat. So they see the other car coming at them, and that's the way that they see it.
Yeah.
Now, but when you've had the experience and you've made it through that trauma, you've made it through that stress or that uncomfortable situation, now you can look back at it and you can see the whole situation, including yourself. And that's a very, I guess, beneficial opportunity that only the human being has, where they're able to look back at something that they experienced, and now they can see the whole situation, and they can choose the way that they want to see it. They can either say, well,
Uh,
I was in a car accident and I almost died, and therefore I'm not going to drive a car ever again,
right.
because I'm a victim of a car accident. And
Right.
human beings are all victims at times, by the way. I just want to, reiterate that it's
Yeah.
not, human beings always find themselves in the victim position, but human being is not meant to stay there. It's not
Right.
meant to stay there.
Right.
And reframing and looking at it from a spiritual perspective
Right.
is, one of the foundations of being able to let go of that experience and coming away from it more,
Yeah.
like, in a more strengthened and a liberated way than
Sure.
the person
Sure.
was when they experienced it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Hope that makes sense. Hope that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. I mean, the there's a construct out there that's gotten a lot of research called post-traumatic growth. And as you know, post-traumatic growth is a shift in framing. It's a shift in perspective. And it's not an easy process, but it's a process whereby someone experiences a trauma, and um, and they shift from being kind of the subject of that trauma to seeing the trauma and themselves in the era of their life, in the era of time. And over time, they reframe their understanding of the meaning of the whole experience. And so there's obviously, like you said, a big emotional healing part of it that has to happen, an emotional release part of it, and a processing. But then there's like a reframing and a shifting in meaning. And the example that comes to mind is I had a patient who had experienced horrible sexual trauma, kind of repeated things that shouldn't happen to anybody, really difficult for many years, and was in a constricted, victimized place, but then had some experiences, met some teachers, and had some therapeutic experiences and some life experiences. And she started learning martial arts. And, she became, first of all, did a lot of emotional healing, but she also strengthened herself just being in her body and her sense of confidence and her ability to protect herself. And she opened up a martial arts school for women. And so she teaches women now how to have a sense of presence and a sense of not neuroticism, but just awareness of where they are in space, and how to like walk through a city in a way that they just are much less likely to get attacked. So
Wow.
she's taken her experience of vulnerability and pain and victimization and turned it into, now she's a teacher, and she empowers women to actually protect themselves and feel more confident and help them walk the same path of healing that she's gone on.
Wow, yeah, that's definitely inspirational stuff. And I think that is the perfect example of someone that is strengthened and liberated from what they went through, and obviously using that to benefit others is a very inspirational thing.
Yeah. Okay, great. This has been a great conversation so far. This is Dr. Schiller interviewing Josh Goldberg, CBT practitioner, but he does much more than that. Um, we're going to take a break because this has been such a rich conversation. We need to make it two parts. So look for the second part of this conversation if you want to see what else we discuss. There's a whole bunch of other interesting topics coming along about dealing with toxic shame, how these things manifest in physical symptoms, what are the kind of the physical things that a person can do to complement the sort of psychological, emotional things, so to speak, thinking about both the software and the hardware that leads to healing. And thanks for being here so far. Looking forward to seeing you in part 2.